Our November program, I gave the title Dance to the Stars, because I included pieces that in one way or another, they have something to do with dancing on the first half. The first piece was written by Carl Maria von Weber, but it was written for piano. And then another composer, Berlioz, orchestrated it. And it's a delightful piece because it starts with a solo cello. And then we get into a very elegant 19th century European style waltz. And then after the waltz ends, the solo cello appears. And whenever I do the piece, I explain to the audience that first the gentleman goes and asks the lady to dance. Then they dance, but when the dance is over, please don't applaud, because the gentleman has to escort the lady back to her chair. And that's, of course, is the cello solo. The next piece was written by a composer who teaches at Eastern Michigan. And I was very happy to meet Anthony Iannacone. I conducted a couple of his pieces. He said to me, "Do you want me to write a piece for the Dearborn Symphony?" So he did, and we premiered it in 2008. And this is one of the things that I have done during my tenure, since I've been music director, was to try to include composers from Michigan, and more broadly American composers, but to promote artists in the community. And Tony is a wonderful composer, and he wrote this piece knowing the orchestra, so it was really written for us. He called it Dancing on Vesuvius, because it was inspired by a letter that another composer wrote, Alban Berg, when the Congress in Berlin was burned down in 1933, and the people were dancing out in the streets, etc. But Berg is writing to his wife, saying they are celebrating, they are like having a carnival, but underneath you can sense the trouble that's coming, and that was the Second World War, of course. Now, Tony used it as inspiration and wrote a piece that starts with some dissonant, but then there's the much more opulent element and the dancing, and then this tension that hopefully would be relieved. Now, having gone from the very graceful 19th century to this more tense but very exciting, then I wanted some much more relaxing music. And I thought that the ideal would be Dvorak with his Slavonic dances. And Dvorak is the type of composer that celebrates the people's music, the people's culture. So he bases these dances on the Bohemian, on the Slavonic, on the Eastern European character, basically. And they're familiar to everyone. So I cannot do them all, so I'm choosing 3 of them. Now, for the second half, the biggest piece on the program will be Mozart's Jupiter Symphony, which is a fantastic masterpiece. But I wanted to go from the dancing to get to Jupiter. I found this little piece by a wonderful American composer, John Corigliano, called Voyage, which originally he wrote for chorus. And then he himself, 20 years later, he rewrote for flute, solo, and strings. And he felt that the strings could represent the human voice very well. For this occasion, the featured soloist will be our own Dennis Carter, our principal flutist of the orchestra. The closing piece on the program, the Jupiter Symphony, is truly one of the symphonic masterpieces. This symphony, along with the other 2 of his last symphonies, he wrote like in a period of 6 weeks. And he himself was having a hard time at the time, but you cannot hear it in the music. The music is extremely optimistic, extremely happy, extremely masterful. The last movement, where he writes in what we call counterpoint, he manages to use 5 themes at the same time and coordinate everything, and it's just unbelievable, both to musicians and to non-musicians. I like to tell people that Mozart writes music to describe the world the way it should be, or the way the world is in heaven, let's say, in the ideal world. His Jupiter Symphony is truly one of his, I hate to say the greatest, but one of the greatest, because there's so much music by Mozart that's really absolutely at the top of everything.